these voting machines. They are blatantly full of holes, especially when stuff goes over the internet.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Pennsylvania case. Alito had said, they had to segregate the ballots. Was there
Right.
another hearing on that today? You said something came out today on that?
Yeah. He ordered that they cannot count the ones
Oh, okay.
after that the Pennsylvania court acted improperly in extending the vote.
Right.
That's a huge victory.
That's big.
And that's big. I mean, on the earthquake scale, it's not, but we live in such an era of non-accountability. We're not used to seeing people literally uphold the law. And so it's so refreshing.
Yeah. You've talked before about Hammer and Scorecard, and I know that Dominion, the voting machine company, has come under a lot of scrutiny recently. People have been looking through the manuals, taking a look at the kinds of things that operators of the equipment could do if no one's keeping an eye on them.
Right.
And I know that in early October, some election-related equipment was stolen in Philadelphia. Some USB sticks, I think a laptop from Dominion or a Dominion contractor.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's it seems like if you were able to program the machines, that you could. There's just so many settings on them that it's the sort of thing where you could get any kind of outcome you would want.
Did you also hear that just minutes to hours prior to the election, the ballots being counted, and my focus here is on the tallying of the votes, not the actual filling out and voting of ballots, that Dominion sent out a software update, a so-called patch.
Right, like
that's
right
interesting
before the election,
too.
right?
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah. The other thing I wonder, kind of maybe drawing on your experience as an analyst, although I don't know if the people or institutions you were analyzing knew they were being analyzed, but how much you can talk about that. It might be a little bit different now, because the Trump campaign is looking for the intelligence. So they got hotlines set up, websites set up, phone numbers set up, or people who have witnessed fraud or voting irregularities. Whistleblowers. They're saying, come on out, whistleblowers. And some people like the Lincoln Project, I just one example, are encouraging people to spam these emails, just send in garbage, send in fake leads, call them up and, just make fun of Trump or pull pranks. So I know that, I guess what I'd like to ask you about is what are some good ways to make sure that you're not getting suckered by false evidence of vote fraud that might be sort of put out there as a lure to then discredit the effort?
No, this is information warfare at its most brutal, and we're living it in this nation. Something I didn't think we would be involved in at this point in my life. I never believed we'd see it here, but we are, and it's every bit. They've done their homework. Somebody is very smart about psychological operations and mechanisms to cause impressions and behaviors to change in some desired way. And there are no commonly available tools. We are all a victim of our information sources, our personal networks. And when you venture out to people you don't know, people sending in emails, whether they're on your side or the other side, trying to sow dissent and disinformation, that is not easy. That is not simple. It's like you have to do as much due diligence as you can. And maybe you tighten up the requirement that if you have a tip-off, you must provide a phone number and an address. Most people don't do that. They just say, send me an email and tell me about something, and that's it. Maybe we have to ask a little more information and take a step that verifies, just like with voting, we need to verify.
Right.
Yeah, I cannot think of an easy way. It's going to involve time and work.
And, you know, and I guess one thing is also seeing who's willing to come forward and actually sign an affidavit, you know, put themselves
Exactly.
on the skin in the game there.
Well, no, you're right. And what I have found out is real whistleblowers are not afraid to come forward. They are initially, and then at some point they go through the mental pluses and minuses of blowing the whistle, the risks, and they make a decision. And when someone does make that decision to come forward with good information, God bless them for doing it. But there are oftentimes people who are afraid to do it, and they don't do it. I mean, I teach ethics from time to time, and I go to an audience and I say, has anybody here ever seen anybody do anything illegal at work? And I will say, raise your hand, and about 3/4 of the audience raises their hand. And I ask them, did you think about approaching that person or telling someone about it? And we all know what that answer is. Well, I didn't want to confront the person. I didn't feel it was my station to do this. I didn't want to be a squealer. I was afraid that would get around and that wouldn't sit well. But this is how people rationalize passive acceptance of law breaking. And it starts out with small stuff, and then it gets bigger and bigger, potentially, with certain people who see more things in the accounting department. Books aren't being quite done the right way. And so all I know is, Jason, it's a terrible, rampant corruption in our society is virtually out of control. And then I look at the World Bank and these institutions that are trying to give money and assistance to the poorer nations of the world. And I find out that more of that money given is stolen by corrupt individuals along that money chain process, both outside the receiving country and within it, that more than half of what's thrown at the targeted nations is gone. It never makes it. More than half.
Wow.
We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars globally.
Sounds like some happy bureaucrats along the way.
Oh, there
know,
are. There are.
Sometimes also when the money does get to where it's going, especially today, you know, they're trying to put more and more. There's just this big conference in London where they're saying, okay, we got to rebuild from the coronavirus. We got to have a better economy. And the way they do that is they say, well, we got to put it all into green technology, like extremely expensive windmills, uneconomical solar panels.
Exactly.
You get countries that are living in energy poverty, and they're basically being told, well, tough, you're going to have to use this incredibly expensive energy.
Yep.
You know?
I heard about that. I lived half of 2018 in Amsterdam, and the country was getting ready to inform every Dutch homeowner, not apartment dweller, but homeowner. They were going to have to completely re-engineer their heating and cooling systems, rip out what's there. I mean, the expense, can you imagine? And one guy that worked with the Dutch government said to me, and they don't even know, the people don't, that this is coming. Imagine the uproar. So this is all going to come to some kind of a head. I'm not sure how it'll play out in Europe.
You know, one other thing about the sorting through the wheat and the chaff, or the wheat and the falsehoods,
Yes.
Because a lot of people online want to help, and unless you are a police department, the Department of Justice, able to subpoena records and track people's motions and this kind of thing, and do these real investigations, you're pretty limited to open source investigations, which it seems like can find good leads. You find a statistical anomaly here. You say, okay, this is where we ought to investigate, or an improbable outcome over in this precinct or these precincts. But then at a certain point, it seems like I wonder if that's going to be enough in court versus having to actually find the proof that something, a witness to the wrongdoing, as opposed to an impossibility in the outcome. I don't know where that stands, but I know a lot of people want to help. So there's a lot of this, data analysis going on, which is just, it's a little bit tough if you don't have, access to many past years' data to compare it to. And
that's right. I mean, a guy just hired Bill Binney and me to look at Bayesian additive regression models, that kind of statistical stuff. And Bill and I, after many years of starting with nothing in terms of solving an intelligence issue, answering a question about something for which you have little or no sources, we have learned you don't start with a model. That's not the beginning point. Models come after many, many attempts to define a model. And they're based on pretty specific situations. And so someone says, okay, can't we apply a model to 2020 election? Well, this is probably the most different kind of election we've ever had.
Right.
And so how can you have a model? There is no model. There isn't any. And so it begins with the data. You've got to look at the data. And to be honest with you, I think you'll agree, if you look at, and there's been a few things floating around the ether about certain laws as data comes in and slopes and so forth and differentials. There's some pretty blatant marks on the graphs that show when very unusual things happen. So I don't think we're in a model kind of a problem. We're in a look at the data, spot the anomalies, drive them to ground. And if somebody wants to put a model potentially after this election's over, and you've had a good look at the data, fine. But now is not the time to try to apply models.
Is that a common error that you've seen in analysis, that people sort of make way too many assumptions at first and make an imaginary model to compare to data?
Yeah, no, they really do. And Binney, who at one point at NSA was working with research people with different skills, they would always want a model, especially if it was a data flow thing in an IT environment, they wanted to model it. And Bill said, no, I don't want to model it. I want it live on the network so that I actually see it perform. I can see the issues. And this, and of course, Bill's thinking what I want to do is not so threatening to the infrastructure that it's not a safety or a risk issue as much as it is people not wanting to take risks. The modelers were sold on models. Binney said, throw them out. I don't need the assumptions. I need to learn because we've never done this before. So it's kind of like today, this election, we have to learn and then we'll build a model. But models are not what's needed now. And frankly, they're so blatant about what they've done, it's not hard to see.
I wonder this, there's so much room for improvement in the American election, American voting system. if we're just sort of redesigning it at this point
Yep,
from the
yep.
top down, which is a little bit tough because top down means national, and that you can't really get around the fact that the states run these things. That's in the
Right.
Constitution.
Right.
You know, like one thing, for example, my sister had moved, and so she voted in person in her new state, but she had gotten mailed to her old apartment the form from her previous location, which
Right.
because she had moved after the registration deadline, maybe, but it's so easy for one state not to tell the other state.
Absolutely.
Unless you use social security numbers, you don't even really know if two people with the same name are the same person. There's no national ID.
Exactly.
I mean, what would, if we're redesigning this, where would you start? How do you think
I'd start with that problem set. That's what I call the voter roll, the registration rolls. You must validate everyone that's on it for your precinct, your state, your county, whatever. And this should not be a batch process that's thought about once every 6 months before the election. Otherwise, they put it to bed for 3 years or whatever, or 2 years. It should be 24/7 available. You should be able to register on the day of the election. Walk in, enter your name, your address, your phone number, your social security number, whatever's necessary. All the right databases sit in the background. Your information is banged against property records, phone ownership records, social security, live and death indices, telephone books, white pages. In other words, and motor vehicle registration information, real ID information. Now you put someone's data against that kind of a variety of databases, you're going to get a lot of truth. If it doesn't match up, red flag pops up. I'm sorry, could you stand over here and we'll try to resolve why you're not being approved by the system. So if you had this system up and running for all 50 states, we would get rid of, I'll bet you 99% of voter registration problems right up front. Right up front. And it would also eliminate another electronic opportunity to cheat. And that is, I didn't even know this, Jason, but when you walk into a polling place, they sign you in. Now, you may do it yourself. And what I'm hearing that's in operation in many of the states for this election are tablets. They're iPads or the other operating system. You know what I mean? And people put their name in, their address, just to sign in. But I'm also finding out in Texas, they're using that to cheat. So that the person, if you register as a Democrat, you get 2 ballots. And if you register as an R, you'll only get 1. So already, this relatively new technology for just signing into a polling place is being hacked and used by someone for an advantage. And so I think we have to find a way to drive to an absolute minimum electronic opportunities to get inside the system. Now, even the registration process I just spoke to you about with many databases, that would have to be really locked down, at least the core of it, where the person reveals their information, that we need privacy to be invoked. And then when the person is held in a database as a registered voter, we really need good database security to make sure people can't break into that database. And so someone would have to think about the traffic going in and out the input output between that database and querying the other national and local databases to do the comparison of the name, the address, social security number, all that kind of stuff. So it won't be cheap if we do lock it down, but it's something we owe ourselves as a nation to have secure elections with high integrity. We have to be willing to bite this bullet. And so that's step one, the registration process. The voting process, as you know, is another electronic process. Some people choose to fill out a paper ballot like I did, and then it gets scanned. But the minute it gets scanned, people can play, as you know. You can play with that. And so again, it's not foolproof. Security comes into play. And I think if good security were implemented at each step, it would greatly reduce the problem. We just have states that are running Windows 7. There's not been support for Windows 7 since last January. And so they're very outdated, and they're not patched properly. And so right now it's very easy. All of that needs to be rethought from a security aspect. But I also say this, let's stop making the current kinds of election systems that we're doing. They're computer-based. And when you have Windows 10 or Windows 7 running your vote tally, you actually have multiple avenues to be hacked. I would like to see single service devices. A voting machine could be a handheld tabulator with a list on it, and you poke, and it could have a wire on it, not a wireless connection. And just examine each point and see, we're not stupid in this country. There's a lot of brilliant people in laboratories and other places, and I'll bet you there's functionality used in the commercial sector or military somewhere that would kind of duplicate voting. What is voting? It's lists. You generate a list and you select from it. It's not rocket science.
Right.
Yeah. So we need the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it elegant, but not ridiculous like Microsoft Windows. We don't need that.
You don't need all that. You don't need all that to count votes.
Don't need it. No, exactly.
In terms of the counting, I mean, single service devices would be good. In terms of the ability to fully trust the election, it seems that once you get to any degree of complexity, the average person, even if you present them with all the evidence, wouldn't be competent to be able to say, oh, I can have faith in this outcome.
Exactly.
Do you think that there is a way to successfully use electronic voting? I mean, do you think that like actual, pen on paper is required, or do you think that we really could do it electronically in a secure way?
I think we could. We have grades of encryption for our military and our security agencies that mathematically cannot be broken. They really can't. And even if you tried, you're going to have to spend one hell of a lot of money and be willing to wait a lot of time to get an answer to something. So it's usually daunting. And if you just build a security system that's daunting enough to hit the pocketbook, I think you'll be home free and we can do it. But it has to be built into the system at every point. It has to be part of the system. It has to be part of its DNA, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I wonder how much, it seems like auditing the use of the systems, in other words, by the administrators and so on, would have to be a factor to be able to have trust in a system like this.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that exists currently, but.
No, I don't think it is. Maybe an afterthought, but I don't really think it is. The whistleblower, Dennis Montgomery, has told me not only does Hammer and Scorecard work as we've talked about it, but in addition to that, we have preloaded false logon administrator privileges being buried in these machines in places where only a remote bad guy knows where to get them, and then log on and have complete access to the tally machine and do nefarious things. That's a technique that's widely known. And these systems, at least until we change to something better, and there'll probably always be a need to audit. I would audit every bit of disk space and file on any kind of a machine. I would never assume that it's pure and untouched, never. So bringing up auditing is important. It has to be continuous and routine. Willing to be part of a murder board, if you will, or a red team that who's supposed to hack into the system and defeat it. And I know we do that. We play war games, red team, blue team, at national defense levels. But so I think you could still make this fun and maybe give some reward for being a member of it.
Right.
Some simple thing, a new computer, whatever, I don't know, a check for $1,000. It would be worth it to the nation to have a set of really good minds. And it wouldn't be age restricted. If you're 16 and you can play with the big boys, come on in, come on in. And but if you're 80, same thing. If you're still lucid and you can think a little bit, come on in. And so I'd rather do it that way, a defined group, hand selected. Yep.
At this point, it's tough because some of this stuff is woulda, coulda, shoulda. This election. Well, as I know, you made efforts to try to rectify this in advance of this election.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. I started with a lady in Northern Virginia by the name of Carolyn Malinek, who understands elections, politics, the Hill, Washington, D.C., and how all this comes together. I don't understand that territory. I'm just a Russian linguist who happened to work at NSA and had a lot of fun solving intelligence problems. So when I get into this sort of public arena that I'm not used to, I'm used to being in a black box, everything being secret, and now everything's wide open, and you have to look under every stone because you don't know who even to trust. And we know people, already I've heard General McInerney, I know I have been approached by bad people. Our whistleblower was called a week and a half before the election, and someone tried to hire him because of his skills. Now, who would make that offer a week and a half before the election? I almost want to go back to him and say, do you have a trace of that approach? Do you have a phone number or something? I'd like to go work it backwards and see if I could find out who did that. It's somebody who wanted to get into his knickers and find out stuff that he knew ahead of the election. So you get these little indicators, and even in the disinformation world, you see New York Times comes out and says, there's no problem with Dominion. There's no problem. So the counter-information people on the other side that's not by accident, that's purposeful. So this game is well underway of disinformation. That's why I'm glad you brought it up to begin with. So you have the voting process itself that's open. I know when I voted this time, I chose not to use the electronic machine to make my choices. I chose to mark a ballot with ink, color in the little oval. And I told my family to do the same. I said, we probably won't need it, but if it is, it's there. It's there. Now, here's a problem that we do have that I want you to think about. People get mail-in ballots Or even if you vote the way I just described, at some point, the ballot gets separated from the person, and you have no way to trace back. We need some kind of a arbitrary code assigned to a person in a secure database, and that code or number needs to be on the ballot so that you can get back to it.
Mm.
Because right now there are many ballots that have been taken out of envelopes. You can't check the postmark because the postmark doesn't follow the ballot. So that's an issue we're going to have to work.
Right.
Although I did tell somebody today, even in that case where ballots are being counted on November 4th illegally or 5th, at some point that count has to be given to someone running a computer that enters them into the report that's part of the count that gets reported up to the state level. When you make that entry, a computer knows when you did that. There's a log. And if there isn't, we're going to have to make sure it's a time hack for every update, every change in number, every addition that's made has to be, like you said, audited. And part of the audit are logs that do time and date hacks. So that if someone rules, you can't count anything from the 4th of November and you can't really trace it to a ballot. Well, I would say any additions to totals made on 4 November, maybe within an hour or two of overlap, I might allow a 1 or 2 hour from November 3rd, because it's hard to get that absolutely, stop immediately on the 3rd, because you don't know that somebody didn't get a cup of coffee. Oops, it passed midnight. Now I'm taking November 3rd votes and I'm making the change on the 4th, but it's still legal. So there's a little slush factor I'd put in there. But by and large, there should be no more additions to totals on the 4th of November or the 5th or the 6th.
Yeah, I know that some states allow mail-in ballots, and this election was, of course, very unusual because there were so many mail-in ballots.
Sure.
Because, I mean, offering people the opportunity. Some states said, "Hey, no excuse needed. You want an absentee ballot? You don't feel comfortable? Fine, that's on you." But then just sending them out to everybody, it's, it creates this chaos, especially in states where they can't start processing them until election day. So then you get this huge backup. You can legitimately take days to get through everything, and that's just more time for who knows what to happen.
Absolutely right.
I guess I just have 2 more questions.
Sure.
I think. So one is about the ballot tracing, because I know some states make it illegal for you to photograph your ballot, I guess, so that you can't, prove who you voted for, so that nobody could pay you for your vote and demand proof. I think that's the justification for it. I'm wondering if that would present an issue with if you have ballots traced to individual people, both, there's the difficulty of every person wants their vote, of course, to be secret. And there's also the added factor that you don't want people to be able to prove how they voted for reasons like that, of people paying you for your vote or something along those lines. How does that all fit together with something like a unique identifier per ballot? Or
yeah, I'm not sure I have an easy answer to that. My own feeling is, I think when you vote in this country, we have traditionally put process emphasis on making sure everybody votes, has a chance. And really, in my view, there's been too much emphasis on that. We've made it so easy that now the law almost doesn't mean anything anymore. And we have to rethink this and get back to an approach where it says, you're going to have to show some credentials. I really do think, the government's making us all go to real ID. And I had to go through that process recently, and it's not bad. It's not bad in that you've got to produce some fundamental documents to get your ID. I worry more about where they're putting it and storing all that information, because I'm not sure government manages data very well. And I know all my security clearance background investigation data is already known to the Chinese government.
That was part of that big hack.
Yeah, on OPM. And so we know the government does a lousy job. And I've also worked on some contracts for Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection. I've been around in those databases, and I can tell you they are enormously sloppy, and their data has not been cleaned. And so it's common stuff, Jason. It's like IBM. If it's I space B space M, that's different from IBM no spaces. And if it's capitalized, that's different from those two. And if it's in small letters, that's different from those three. And so now I really have 4 entities. And so when you do a query, you don't really get the data you're looking for. And when we tried to raise that issue to the contractors, it's layers of contractors. It was Raytheon, I believe, that was managing the people we were answering to. And they simply answered this way: the data is the data. We were not to question it. And we said, but wait a minute, you're building applications on this data. And you're talking about imports, exports. How is anyone ever going to use this data for any meaningful purpose? And they said, the data is the data, which basically meant don't ask. And so we are really screwed up in many, many ways. Elections is just one aspect of it. I was shocked. I was literally shocked. It's almost as though someone's trying to sabotage the integrity of our governance and all the institutions we have. It scared me. It really did. I'm not scared now, but when I remember when I was listening to these people, I said, how can this be? How can it be? And then try to whistleblow to somebody and call a congressman. They don't even want you to tell them because they want plausible deniability. They don't want to have it worry about it. Yeah.
That seems kind of shocking, given the huge amounts of money that go into all this information technology infrastructure, that there's still so many holes. And I guess it came up, for example, with the COVID lockdowns and the mass unemployment and all of this, where the states, they just couldn't even process the claims because their systems were so ancient.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
They don't want to break it. They're like, it's working fine. It's Fortran. No one knows how to use that anymore.
That's right.
Just let it be. Right?
Yes, it's true. And you'll appreciate this. While Bill and I were working at Customs and Border Protection on this modernization program, we found out they had no enterprise data model, none. And so that just adds to the frustration that we had. So one day at home, on my home computer, I'm part of a news group that I belong to. And it's kind of a political thing, anti-Clinton, it began with the Clinton era. And it's held together because there's some very brilliant, good people on this, probably about 40 of us. And one of them happened to post a bulletin, open source, from the Department of Commerce, US government, Bureau of Intelligence, Bureau of Industrial, I can't remember the last letter. The purpose of this bureau is to disseminate information from multiplicity of sources, including the Pentagon as a source, about businesses that are involved in nefarious activities, so that a business does not accidentally contract to one of these businesses and end up being complicit. And of course, the businesses don't want to be unknowingly involved in the building of triggering devices for IEDs, because all the liabilities and publicity that would cause. So I saw this list of Iranian companies and even a couple names that were pulled off of a hard drive in a terrorist safe house somewhere in Iraq. And a US Army guy came across it, made the disk available, and the info worked its way out, and disseminated to our government. And so I saw this and I said, let's see, I've got access within imports, exports, associated with Customs and Border Patrol, who were tasked to worry about that sort of thing. So I took it into work. And then I find out I only have access to the imports database, that it's separate from exports. And I said to the people in there, I said, how do I access exports? And I just want to query this name, see if this person's receiving goods from the United States. And he said, oh, you got to go see Al. I said, who the heck is Al? He says he's down in the basement, got a long beard, kind of scruffy guy. He's our resident guru on this database and language and queries. And I said, you mean I can't just go on my computer, open an icon, and get a path to query exports? Oh, no. Imagine.
Wow.
So we go down and we meet Al. Nice guy. Nobody bothers Al. He just hums along, does his thing. And we said, Al, here are the metadata that we're looking for. See if we can get a hit. Could you check this out? And he said, yeah, I can do that. And I said, how long do you need? He said, about 3 days. Now, this is a simple data query. 3 days. Now, I have a feeling the query itself wasn't hard, but Al was probably asked to do many things for people looking at exports, and I wasn't top on the list. But I still had to wait. Well, guess what? Bingo! We get a hit. One of those guys on that list is importing perfumed soaps. Now, we don't know it at the time. We're trying to say, what has perfumed soap got to do with improvised explosive devices in the battle area, that are blowing the legs off of our soldiers? It wasn't the soap. They were hiding electronics in the soap. Now, I said, isn't that clever? Because, you can train a dog to smell electronics. They have an odor, from the chemicals that are in them. But if you cover it up with perfumed soap, you see what I'm getting at? So these people are very, very clever. And so we wrote up, Bill and I did, we did a PowerPoint showing our findings, the sources of the data, the commerce bulletin itself as the tip off, a nice little package. And we didn't know who to send it to. So we talked to some people and they said, Customs and Border Patrol has an anti-terror component, and you ought to send it to Thomas Bush. And so we got his email and so forth, sent it over there, and he was amazed. And he said, wow, what terrific work. He had his own analyst, but he said, we packaged it. It was all done. We put it in an Excel spreadsheet, And we had also done part of our work at home, Jason, just using Google, because the website was out there that these Iranian companies were using. It looked very innocent. They were front companies for this importation operation of components that, when put together, built triggering mechanisms for these IEDs. And there were about 5,000 businesses. But what was peculiar to me and Bill, and this is one of the tricks of analysis, sometimes when they do front companies and just list a name, they don't put much thought into it. And being foreign, they'll say, they'll make up a name like Jupiter Rubber Company. I mean, there's just something a little strange about Jupiter. And they'll do that with their nomenclature, their naming mechanisms across many of these, and you'll say, there's something smelly here. Well, we scraped that website and had a friend do that for us, organized the data, looked at phone numbers, looked at post office box numbers, locations, and what we found out is there really weren't 5,000. That using the postal box numbers and telephone numbers and area codes, zip codes, we could narrow it down to about 350 core businesses, all part of the same operation, and someone was operating it. So we took these lists and put them into categories. And we found other websites that were tied in with it, some of it in China. And we sent it up to people, and they said, wow, that is great, you're fired. I'm serious. They fired us.
Did they explain why they fired you? I mean,
we weren't doing our primary job.
Which was to look the other way, or what was your primary job?
Develop algorithms that would help them on their imports for certain types of goods. It wasn't anything very important compared to this.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, and having come from an NSA background where we're actually, much of our audience is the United States military, whether in peace or in combat. NSA is a combat support agency. We just felt an obligation to get this to the Pentagon. More important than somebody that's a bean counter on something that really doesn't threaten anybody. And they did, they let us go. Now, 2 years later, Bill finds a news item that has the name of one of these companies and one of the guys that we tipped off. They didn't throw that report out that we built. They disseminated it. And oh, by the way, I didn't tell you, we disseminated that Excel spreadsheet part to the Joint IED Office of the Pentagon, a guy named Colonel Woody, who gave us all kind of kudos when they received it, because it was actionable. You know, it was in a form that they could take and really use. But 2 years later, Bill did a query. I'd forgotten about what we did, you know, and Bill says, hey, Kirk, look at this. They arrested 8 people in Florida associated with this import activity, export for us, but import to the Iranians. And so I just tell you that story because it's kind of a fun story, but it's also, and it's all from open source perspective, people can find these front companies. They're out there on websites. Most people just don't realize it. They don't take the time to discover it. But you need the impetus. You know, what's the significance of what you find? Sometimes that's hard to find unless you've had an internal tip-off or something like that.